Hello and welcome. Right, today we've brought them to
Borley Rectory.
Borley Rectory. Now, Borley Rectory is said, or somebody once said, this is the most haunted place in the world.
Ooh.
But is it? So my first mistake of the day is I just said the most haunted place in the world. Apparently it was the most haunted house in England. Okay, I've just read my notes and I got it wrong. I'm sorry. I'll try to get everything correct from now on. Now, the place was built by a Reverend Bull. That was his name, Reverend Bull, and he needed a rectory. Okay? So they built that for him. It was about 1862. It was exactly 1862, actually. This isn't it. This is Borley Church. Should just point that out. The rectory itself doesn't exist anymore. It was just across the road and it got demolished. We'll go into that in a little bit more detail in a minute. So the rectory was built on somewhere where there'd already been a rectory many years before, but that burnt down in 1841. The new rectory which they built actually burnt down in 1939 and it was demolished in 1944, something like that. So the rectory was built by Reverend Bull. It was only a small house, it wasn't massive, but he had to make it massive because he had sex a lot. Apparently he had 14 children. 14 children, that's a lot of children, that's a lot of nookie. So Borley Rectory became quite a big place with 14 children living in it. Now the nearby church, which is here, this is the nearby church. This is from about the 12th century. This is a very old church. And they reckon there was a priory around here, a Benedictine priory, in around 1362. So that's old, about the same time as the church was built, they think. But there's a bit of a myth which goes with this, which is what this whole story is based on. The myth is that there was a monk in this monastery, and he was having sex. They're all having sex around here, the reverends, the monks, they love sex. The monk was having a relationship with a nun from a nearby convent. So if you can imagine a reverend, you know, with his, sorry, is it a monk? A monk with his, like, baldy bit there, like mine, but bigger. He'd have one of them, and probably like a maroon-coloured shawl type gown on. And a nun, all in black with a bit of white there, and lots of sex. They were doing that together, that's what they did. Now, people found out about this relationship. Probably someone called Bob in the village. He found out and he told everyone else, he's knocking her off. They shouldn't have been doing that. So what they did is they executed the monk, because that's what they did in them days. And the nun, they bricked her up alive in the walls of a nun place. Is it a nun place? What do you call them? A convent. She was bricked up within the walls of the convent, alive. That can't have been nice. So now we get on to the paranormal stuff. Woo! Right, the story is that in 1863, just a year after the rectory was built, the first paranormal things started happening. Footsteps were heard in the rectory. Now, then you skip forward to the year 1900, and 4 of the children of Reverend Bull, you know, he had 14, 4 of the children reckon that they saw a nun. They saw the ghost of a nun 60 yards from the rectory, so it'll probably be just on this main road, which is just the other side of the church. They saw this nun and they tried talking to her. They probably said, "Hello, are you alright?" And she ignored them. She wasn't talking to them, and then she just disappeared. She disappeared, she wasn't really there. So they were convinced, and apparently one of the local guys who knew the family, he was convinced that they were convinced that they did actually see a nun. So far, so good. I believe the story entirely. I do believe 4 kids thought they saw a nun. I'm happy with that. So far, it's haunted and it's paranormal. But it doesn't stay like that. Things get a bit stupid soon. So the first ridiculous story is, over the next 40 years, people would see, coming up the road, a horse-drawn carriage being driven by 2 headless coachmen. Now, I've never believed all that kind of stuff. you wouldn't be able to see where you're going, would you? If they'd come from around the last corner, they'd have just gone straight across the road. They wouldn't have known to turn because they're headless. They can't see anything. I just don't believe in headless anything ghosty things. I think that's silly. But for 40 years that went on. Now, Reverend Bull, he died about 1892, I think it was. His son took over, and he died or disappeared. I don't know what happened to him. But then it was Reverend Smith and his wife. They moved in here. And I think they had an adopted child living with them as well. They moved into the rectory. And then we're coming into more modern days, you see. We're after 1900, and there's more recorded evidence of it now. And there's some really weird, stupid recorded evidence. So the Smiths moved in, and Mrs. Smith, she was cleaning out the cupboard. You know, they'd just come into this new house. She went in the kitchen. She thought, right, I'll clean our kitchen out, ready for our family. We don't muck from the last family, the Bulls. We want it clean. So she opened the cupboard. You know, she had some Jif in her hand and some bleach and some cloths, and she was just about to clean a cupboard. And she opens the cupboard. You'll never guess what were in the cupboard. A skull. There were a bag, and inside, she looked inside, and there was a skull inside it. Now, this is where I'm starting to disbelieve a few things. Surely the Reverend Bull family, wouldn't they have known that they had a skull in the kitchen cupboard? Because you open your kitchen cupboard most days, don't you? All right, we've all got a cupboard which you don't open, which is full of rubbish. And when you move house, you eventually empty it all out and throw it away. You know, you put pens in there, there's usually old lighters, just nails, stuff like that, the odd screw. Because when you build some furniture from, you know, like IKEA furniture, you always end up with some little keys and stuff and spare bits. You put them in that drawer or in that cupboard, don't you? So I fully understand that. But you'd know if there were a skull in there. So I don't believe it. I think that's rubbish. I don't believe there was a skull there at all. And then the paranormal continued. The Smiths kept hearing things and seeing things. There were bells ringing, even though the bells were disconnected. They'd hear bells, they'd see lights up in the windows. No lights there. Just really weird stuff. Footsteps, they'd hear footsteps as well. It was just all starting to kick off a bit. So Mrs. Smith and Mr. Smith, sorry, Reverend Smith, they decided to go to the papers. They went to the Daily Mirror, which even to this day is one of the biggest, if not the biggest, newspaper in Great Britain. So the Daily Mirror turned up and they sent a paranormal investigator along called Harry Price. Now, this is where it gets silly. Harry Price, remember that name because that's what all this stems on. Harry Price comes over from the Daily Mirror, and all of a sudden things start happening a lot more than they used to do. And things happened which they never have happened until Harry Price turned up. Such things as there was a vase which got thrown, there were stones being thrown. What else happened? And other objects. Things were being thrown which had never happened before until Price turned up. So he did his little investigation. He went back to Daily Mirror. They printed out a wonderful story saying this is really, really haunted. And Mrs. Price were thinking, well, hang on, all the phenomena which he's saying happened, I never saw any of that. I never saw vases being thrown. I never saw stones being thrown. I don't believe him. I think he's making it up. So Mrs. Smith were a bit sceptical of him. And that is where I think the story changes. From Mrs. Smith, until she finds the skull in a cupboard, rubbish, and she sees the horse-drawn carriage with no heads on the drivers, up until that point, I believe there is a bit of truth in the story. But from that moment, Mr. Price turns up, it all gets a bit silly, and I don't believe a word of it. And I'll explain why further on into the story. So the Smiths left the rectory in 1929, and a new family came in. Another reverend, a new reverend. Because it was a rectory, you always had the reverends coming in. That's who lived there. Stop jumping. She keeps hearing noises in the background thinking it's a ghost. It's just birds. I can see them.
It's a ghost, but it's scary.
It's not scary, honestly. It's like blackbirds. I can see them running up and down on leaves and stuff. Anyway, getting back to my story. So a new family moved in, which was the Forsyths. Reverend Forsyth, his wife, and their adopted daughter Adelaine, okay? They moved in and they started hearing all weird stuff started happening. It says they included bell ringing, which we'd heard of before, windows shattering, that's a new one, throwing of stones and bottles, we've heard that before, wall writing, people walking, somebody writing on the wall, that's new, and the locking of their daughter in a room which had no key. That's unusual and new. So all these things are starting to get worse and worse and worse. Marianne, the wife of the Reverend, she said she remembered being thrown from her bed. I reckon that was probably the Reverend after a drink, but that's what she's saying. And the Reverend himself, because he's a Reverend, tried to perform an exorcism to get rid of it, but it didn't work. In fact, the first exorcism he did, it got interrupted because he got hit on the shoulder with a fist-sized stone. Where that came from, I don't know. I don't know where Harry Price is at this point. He's not supposed to be at the house, but he might have been there if the Reverend got hit by a stone. As you'll know what I'm talking about later in the story. We're getting there, we're getting there. Just give me time, give me time. So this is where I am convinced the whole story is a load of rubbish. Mrs. Forsyth, right, later on she turned around, she says, I have to be honest, I'm really sorry, I made up all that phenomena, all that weird stuff going on, because I was having an affair with Frank, who was a lodger. They had some guy living there called Frank. Reverend didn't know because he were busy in the church doing churchy stuff. She were at home having nookie and sex with Frank. And the Reverend had come home some days and he'd hear strange noises, probably from the bedroom, like bang, 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 bang. And she'd come downstairs and say, ooh, that's a ghost upstairs and it's doing stuff. This is all true. She admitted to it. She admitted to it. And anyway, they left in 1935. I don't know what became of the Forsyths. I'm guessing they split up. She might have run off with Frank. I don't know. I don't know. It don't go into the story of Frank and the Reverend's wife, or the Reverend. But in 1935, they move on, and somebody else then takes over the house. Harry Price. You remember the psychic? What do you call him? Psychic investigator. He rents the rectory for a year. So Price has this place for a year and he wants to do a massive investigation into the house to see exactly what's going on. I just spit then, I'm sorry. It wasn't a proper spit, just a tiny little bit came out of my mouth. Can't help that. Things happen like that, you've just got to apologise and move on. So Price has this house, he wants to do a proper investigation, so he hires 48 people. They're all like students, you know, from local universities and colleges, stuff like that. And they're in there 24 hours a day, and he just tells them to write down everything which happens, which results over the year over thousands of different unexplainable things. Now, whilst in there was some girl did a séance. Right, and in the séance she got in touch with a nun, a French nun. Remember the story about the nun earlier? Don't know if it's the same one, but there's a story of a nun. Now, this nun is called Marie Laire, Lairre, and she was French, and she travelled to England to marry a member of the Waldegrave family, the owners of the Borley Hall. Now, the Borley Hall is obviously another building very nearby, from the 17th century. This is going back, and apparently this nun was killed. She was murdered on the site of the rectory, and her body is either buried in the cellar of the rectory or thrown into a disused well. But she didn't just contact Marie the French nun, she contacted someone else called Sunex, S-U-N-E-X. This was a guy. Now this guy, this ghostly guy person in the séance said, ooh, tonight, right, and the night was the 27th of March 1938, tonight at 9 o'clock I'm going to burn down the rectory. Woo! And then he disappeared. But before he disappeared, he said something else which I forgot to tell you. He said, also, you're going to find the bones of a murdered person after this fire in the rectory. And then he disappeared, sorry. So on that night, the new owner of the house, there's a Captain Gregson moved in now, and he's unpacking his boxes, as you do, and, you know, there's like 4 flaps to a box, isn't there? So you open them that way, and then when he opened one box that way, the flap of the box knocked over the oil lamp he was using for light. Knocked over the oil lamp, set fire to the old place, and the place burnt down. Now, there was a big investigation into this, and the insurance company concluded it was started deliberately. Oh yes, there's something dodgy going on here. So this is the very point where I said to myself, the entire story since Harry Price came along is a load of rubbish. Okay, and I'll tell you what it is. After this fire, which has already been proven by the investigators at the insurance company that it was started deliberately. After this fire, Harry Price turns up again, goes into the basement to do a little investigation to see if he can find anything. He only just happens to find 2 bones of a girl, a woman, you know, a young woman, old girl, young woman, teenager. He finds 2 bones of a woman, just as the ghost of the man from the seance said that they would. They said they'd find them, and he did. So he's got these 2 bones in his hand, right, and he comes up to this very church right here. Show the church in the background, look. Right here, so you can imagine him coming up with them in his hand, going up to the church, saying, "Excuse me, I've just found these bones of a young woman. Would you mind if I bury them in your churchyard? Can we have like a proper ceremony?" Now, the reverend at the time and all the people of the village had a look at these bones, and they're all looking and they said, "That's pig bones. The pigs are them." He says, no, it's a young woman. It's a young woman, honestly. "No, it's not. It's pigs. Don't be stupid. You can't bury pig bones in his churchyard, this very churchyard." So he has to go away. He goes to another church, Liston graveyard, which isn't far away. He goes to Liston and he says to the reverend there, he says, "Oh, I've got these bones of this young lady. Can I bury them in your churchyard?" And he says, "Yeah, of course you can. Yeah, poor girl. Is that all what's left of her?" "Yeah." "All right, well, we'll do it anyway." So they went there, and there's actually a photograph. We've got a photograph of it actually happening. The reverend stood there burying 2 bones of a pig. Sorry, of a young girl, if you believe Harry Price. I'm not sure if we're going to go to Liston Graveyard just to show you the exact spot. We might do, because it's not far away. But there are 2 pig bones, or a girl's bones, buried right under that spot. So here we are, we have come to Liston Churchyard to get the full story for you. This is the exact spot of where the pig is buried. Or the nun, sorry, the nun. Do you want to just hold it in exactly the same spot?
Yeah.
The picture's taken from about there. Straighten it up a bit. That's it, perfect. Now, the picture's taken from here. Now, when they did the ceremony, this grave wasn't here. It looks old, and I've just looked at it. It's from 2006. That's quite odd. It looks a lot older than that. Anyway, the exact point of where the nun is buried is here. I think you're going to have to look behind the camera now and change it. This is the exact spot where I've got the phone there, and there's a picture with the reverend doing his thing here. And I believe it's Mr. Price, I'm guessing, stood over here watching him. And I think the reverend who did it, the reverend who buried the pig, I believe he's buried here somewhere as well. I might just have a quick look for him. But the odd thing is, if you look on the internet under Liston Churchyard, there are pictures of various people who have come here to, and it doesn't mention a pig. It doesn't mention a pig, it just mentions the nun. There's various pictures of people who've been here and have shown the respect to the nun buried there. Instead, I'm going to be a bit different. I'm going to show my respects to the pig by not eating bacon for 24 hours. Let's have a minute's silence for the pig. Alright, that'll do. And just to end the story of the Liston churchyard, here he is, the Reverend himself, Reverend Alfred Henning. He's buried in here with his wife. He looks a lovely man on the picture, so bless you, Alfred. That is the end of Liston. Let's get back to Borley and the Borley story. And then it all starts to come out. In 1948, poor Harry Price dies, okay? And someone comes forward. It's a guy called Charles Sutton, who is a reporter for the Daily Mail. Now, you've got to remember the Daily Mail is a big rival of the Daily Mirror, who sent Harry Price to the rectory in the first place. So the big rivals. And Charles Sutton from the Daily Mail said, he were a bit of a phony, was Harry Price. He didn't actually do the things he said he did. He says, I went there with him once to the rectory, and I got hit by a stone. I remember something threw a stone at me. And I turned round and I saw someone running away. So I chased after them, grabbed hold of them. It was Harry Price. And in his pocket were a big pocket full of pebbles and stones. Now that tells me Harry Price was just going around. He'd have a pocket full of stone. He'd just be doing this all day long, and people would be thinking it's a ghost throwing these stones. A load of rubbish. In the same year, 3 of Price's researchers, you remember the 48 people who were doing all the weird stuff in the rectory, recording everything, 3 of them came forward and says, yeah, he did make it up, but we were just told to write it down, whatever he told us to do, so we did it. So now you've got quite a few people coming forward saying he's a faker, he's talking a load of rubbish. So as it's all coming out now, people are starting to look stupid. The people who were looking stupid thought they'd better just come clean. So Reverend Foster's wife, you remember she were knocking Frank off, she came forward and she says, yeah, I have to admit, I didn't see any ghosts. All the noises were caused just by wind, and everything was just practical jokes she'd play on her husband because she didn't want him to know that she were knocking around with Frank up in the bedroom whilst he's doing sermons and stuff. And then the children of Reverend Harry Bull, remember he had 14 children, they then admitted, it says, yeah, it's a load of rubbish, no it happened, we just made it up. So, going on everything, what you've heard so far, everything has now been discredited apart from the original family who lived here well before Harry Price. This is all backed up by somebody called Mayerling, a Mr. Mayerling, who apparently the rectory was like a second home to him. It must have been another lodger after Frank had gone. Whether she was seeing him, I don't know. I can't imagine she'd do it twice. I don't know, but Mayerling said he remembered, yeah, the kids of the family. For example, the piano would start playing on its own, and people would see that and go, whoo, that's a ghost, that's a ghost, that's a ghost. But he said that it was actually kids plucking the strings or whatever from the back of the piano with a poker through a gap in the wall, right? So it were all made up. Apparently, Mayerling himself was asked to do weird things. They told him to go around in a black cape, turn his collar up like this, and walk around. You know, his collar it's over his head, so it makes him look headless like this. And walk around the village looking like he's headless, going, woo, woo, woo. I ain't got a head, all you can see is my collar. And he used to write things on the walls, pretending it were a ghost writing the things on the walls. Mayerling himself did that. He admitted it were all a fraud. So the last part of the story is Mayerling actually saying, yes, so it was all fake, but there was one instance where I can't explain it. And he said it like that. Because he were blind in one eye, and I'll explain why. Like that. He was having a séance with some other people in the rectory, having a séance, and all of a sudden the bell started ringing, which he said was impossible because there was no one else in the house apart from the people sat around the table. And then all of a sudden there was a lightning strike, and it seemed to emit from the walls from all directions, this lightning strike, and everyone was paralysed for like 5 seconds. And then when they came round, he was blind in one eye. He could never see again. Mayerling. So he can't explain that. That, my friends, is the entire story of Borley Rectory. supposedly the most haunted house in England. Now I want to turn the camera around at this point and show my Mazzy. Thank you for recording that, Mazzy. You did a very good job.
You're welcome.
Let me just adjust the light. Now, you've heard of Borley Rectory, haven't you? Let's get out of this light. You've heard of Borley Rectory for most of your life, haven't you?
Yeah.
And you've known it as the most haunted house.
Yeah.
Now, when I proved to you when I was doing my notes that it's all a load of rubbish, you were a bit annoyed, weren't you?
I was, yeah, because like, I wanted you to believe what I'd been brought up hearing. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think I've just proven to the
Yeah.
world that it's a load of rubbish.
Yeah.
Harry Price was a fraud, and okay, there might have been things which happened before Harry Price came along, but he came along and just made all this silly stuff up. So it might be haunted, it might be a haunted place. We've done a story, we've finished.
Yeah.
Let's go.
Yeah.
Bye bye everyone.
Bye.
Bye bye, bye bye, bye bye.